I'm Chance Dorland, and this is In Depth, an interview program from expressnews.com with in-depth reporting and other resources for stories affecting San Antonio and Bexar County. There is quite an update in the ongoing story of the death of San Antonio area infant King J. Davila, and I'm joined now by San Antonio Express News writer Emilie Eaton to get the details. Emilie, great to have you back here on the podcast. And before we get to what I would describe as a very startling update on this story, let's start at the beginning. Please remind me of these unfortunate details that you've been following in the death of this 8-month-old boy.
Yes, thanks for having me, Chance. So to recap, King J is an infant. He was an 8-month-old boy, and he was reported kidnapped in early January. And his father claimed that he had stopped at a convenience store on the west side of San Antonio, and that he had gone inside to grab a bottle of water and a couple other items, and that when he came back outside, he realized that his vehicle was missing and that the boy was missing as well. Almost immediately, police began to see through the scheme, or what became revealed as a scheme. They looked at surveillance video of the gas station, and they realized that King's father, whose name is Christopher Davila, that Christopher had purposely checked a couple of different times to make sure that the door was open before he left, and that he had left the keys inside in the ignition with a car running, and then went into the store, and that a woman came from the side of the convenience store and sort of very briskly walked into the car and drove away. It very much looked staged. It looked like he wanted to make sure that his door was open, that he wanted to make sure that the car was running. And so almost immediately, police realized that this was just a big old scheme. They arrested him and charged him with child endangerment. And then about a week later, he confessed to police that, in fact, the boy was dead and that King had died in a supposed accident, and that his father, Christopher, had buried him in a field near his home. So that's sort of the crux of the story.
In addition to that, the arrest of Christopher Davila, the boy's father, also the arrest of two other family members in connection with what you just described, this enormous reveal that made myself, other people, I'm sure, question what they thought they knew about the story that you just described, that the police, the way you described it, kind of immediately saw through the details and thought something else was going on. Well, it appears that something like this has happened again, where we're now questioning what we think we know about this story. Tell me the update.
Yes. So about a week ago, I spoke to King's mother's ex. They are actually still married, but they have been estranged for a long time. And I reached out to this man. His name is Martine Gonzales. When King's mother, Jasmine, was still being questioned by police. And so I wanted to know a little bit more about their relationship. I reached out to Martine. He's in prison about 4.5 hours northeast of San Antonio. And Martine agreed to talk to me. He said he wanted to talk about his ex and that he was very startled about this news about King. And a colleague and I traveled to Tennessee Colony, where the prison is located. And during the course of the interview, Martine explained to me, or revealed to me, that he believes he is King's father. And the reason he believes that is for a couple of different reasons. When he was with Jasmine, his ex, that he used to call her my queen and she called him my king. So he believed that King was named after him. The second reason is, he looked at a picture, he did some research, he contacted a friend, and a friend sent a news article about King J, and he looked at the photo of King and said, "Oh my gosh, that's my child." Apparently, he claims that he has the same eyebrows and the same nose, and that they look very similar. And one of the other last reasons he believes that King is his child is that he was living with Jasmine when King was likely conceived. That was in the summer of 2017. They were living together with Jasmine's parents, and he told me that they were intimate almost every other day. And so for that reason, he believed King was his son.
Has there been any reaction? I mean, obviously, this is a new detail to emerge, so maybe there hasn't been time, but has there been a reaction from Jasmine or the man that up to this point, Christopher, that we had thought we knew was the father of King J?
Yes, there has. Jasmine does not want to talk to reporters. She has really kept to herself, but she did at least say to me that, and I quote, King is me and Christopher's son, not Martine's. He did not even know who King was, and he needs to move on. But on the other hand, Davila's lawyer, Christopher's lawyer, whose name is Bob Behrens, I spoke to him, and he said he believes Martine is King's father based on conversations he's had with Christopher. And I asked him, well, what specifically did Christopher say to you? And he said, well, that's protected by attorney-client privilege. And he didn't want to specify exactly what Christopher had said. But he went on to say that his impression was that Martine didn't want to step up to the plate, and that Jasmine and Martine were already getting divorced. And as such, Christopher, stepped up to the plate and said, "This is my child. I will take care of you. I don't want the child to have to worry about child support. I will take the responsibility of the father."
Emily, you just mentioned divorce. I know that there is an additional reveal, if you will, regarding the legality of this previous relationship, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So Jasmine filed for divorce in the summer of 2018, shortly after King was born. And I told Martine about that during our interview at the prison, and he seemed very confused. And he said to me, he essentially said to me, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't know that Jasmine had filed for divorce." And I was very confused because I had already reviewed divorce records. And on the divorce records, Martine had signed them saying that he recognized, number one, that Jasmine was filing for divorce, and number two, that King was not his son. Because in Texas, you have to, if the wife is pregnant, you have to sign a representation of parentage and a denial of parentage before the divorce is finalized. So I asked Martine about this. I'm like, "What are you talking about? There's documents with your signature on them." And he said, I never signed anything. So I went back and I reviewed the documents again, and I reviewed Martine's signature in previous court records. And I realized that the signature looked very different. And there should be a note of caution there, because signature analysis is very controversial, but it was enough to pique my interest. And so then I took a look at the notary on the documents, and the notary on the documents is someone by the name of Harry Abelow. And I looked up Harry's name, and he's actually dead. And he was dead when those documents were signed. He had been dead for about a year. So I contacted Harry's widow, and she did some research, and she told me she could not find her husband's notary stamp, and that the signature on the documents was actually her signature, but that it appeared as if it was a stamp of her signature. Her employees use a stamp to send letters to clients. So whenever there's just a letter, she works for an insurance firm. And so whenever they need to send anything with her name on it, they stamp it. And next to the stamp is two initials of the employee that's stamping it. And that's the exact same thing that was on the divorce records. There was her signature and then the initials of one of her employees. And she told me that that stamp was also missing and had been missing since April of 2018 when the documents were first signed. So she believes that her husband's notary stamp and her stamp with her signature have been stolen by perhaps the client, and that is how the divorce records were notarized, I guess essentially fraudulently.
These two updates are really mind-boggling, and I say that with complete honesty because this was already a case that was hard to believe, and now we've just discussed what we've discussed. Emily, are the police aware of all this?
I don't know. That is a very good question, Chance. I suspect that they know that King might not be Christopher's son. I am aware that a DNA test was, or a DNA sample was taken from Christopher Davila recently. And it's possible that that could have been for other purposes in the investigation, but I wonder if that actually might have to do with paternity. So I suspect that they do know that Christopher might not be King's father. I'm not sure if they are aware of the documents and the fact that the notary is in fact dead.
I guess now I want to give you time for final thoughts, but also another question that I have, of course, would be how do you think this affects the case? You've been following this for the San Antonio Express News. Obviously, this unfortunate incident still took place. Whether or not Christopher Davila is King Jay's father, King Jay has died. It appears, as you've described, the story is what happened, that there was one story told the police. The police said, we don't believe this. And then another story was unfolded that involved the person we thought was King Jay's father at the time, as well as a few family members. Um, does this change the case at all? I mean, obviously, it complicates things.
That's a really great question. And, I've been thinking about that a lot because I don't want to lose sight, and I don't think the Express News wants to lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, a little boy is dead, and this may really not change anything. Some people, it may just feel like a gossipy sideshow in some ways, and I don't want that to be the fact. That being said, some people have suspected or have questioned whether or not this could give Christopher Davila a motive, whether he found out that he's not King's father and he did something to the child as a result. That being said, Christopher's lawyer claims that he has known that the child wasn't his from the very beginning. So, I think this is an important update, and it does reveal some additional details. Whether or not it changes anything, I guess we'll see.
Well, Emily, I want to now give you an opportunity for the last word on all this. This is quite an update, so thank you for speaking with me, and yeah, back to you for final thoughts.
Yes, thanks again for having me, Chance. One last thing that I think is really important to note is I was interested just on a human level about how Martine feels about all of this. I mean, he never met King, and now he claims that King is his son. And I was wondering how that affected him. And I asked him, and he seemed very choked up about it. After he found out that King was dead, he actually tattooed himself on his hand. It's a portrait of King with his head in his arms, sort of like laying on a table or laying down with his head in his arms. And above it, it said, "Rest in peace," something to the effect of "Rest in peace, innocent boy." And Martine seemed very upset. And I asked him, I'm like, well, this could be your son. And how do you How do you feel about that, knowing that you'll never be able to meet him? And he said, I look at his photo every day and I say, I wish I could have met you. Sometimes I blame myself because King was around a guy who didn't love him. And I thought that was very poignant and sort of, as I was saying before, it got back to the human level of this story and how at the end of the day, there's a little boy that's still gone, and it's very tragic for everyone involved.
And a huge debt of gratitude to San Antonio Express News writer Emilie Eaton for joining me for today's episode of the In-Depth Podcast, an interview program from expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.